Hey guys, so this is the kind of art that Van Gogh was producing during the Paris period. You can see it's quite blue. I'm actually not 100% sure if this is Arles or Paris, to be quite honest. But the picture behind me, which is it this one? That is actually supposed to be Montmartre, which is it certainly presents a very um, countryside feeling to the French suburb, doesn't it? I mean, I've been there and it didn't look like this at all. There certainly weren't any windmills, and so yeah, you see windmills and looks like quite a lot of wheat. But between the painting of this painting and the painting of this painting, which this one, as far as I know, is in all. You can see what a transition is made in terms of color, right? You can see that there's been a tremendous revolution in terms of his palette, right? Okay, Timmy, now that I'm doing a live, okay, gonna lie down. Okay, sorry about those who were up on the bloodline thing. Quite a few things happened at the same time. I arranged to do a live with Kathleen Hale earlier, and then that has been changed. So that definitely disoriented me a little bit. I was also working on a fairly complicated video to edit, the one that I put up earlier about 20 years ago. And then someone who's been part of the channel for a while suddenly, and I must say I've got absolutely no idea why, suddenly is very offended and doesn't want to be part of it anymore. And so that always throws you for a loop. So that happened like literally in the last couple of minutes. So that kind of tends to take your attention off, what you're dealing with. So anyway, yeah, we are. Let's see who's here. Kristen Baxter, Kathy, Sharon Drury, Mel Stiller, Stephanie Jelsey. Thanks a lot for your comments and interest in that 20 years ago thing. It was quite interesting. I found what Stephanie said really interesting as well. You left that comment on Patreon just saying, I didn't actually know that you'd studied a master's in teaching art. Is that right? I mean, that definitely explains your interest in art. Jody, good to see you. Deborah, good to see you as well. No, it's not from this channel. It's well, someone is actually on a couple of channels, but just suddenly, I don't know, don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. Anyway, I don't know whether, yeah, I don't really know or particularly care. Catherine says, is anyone familiar with Goya? He was not a direct influence on Van Gogh, but on Manet and Delacroix. Miami Lifestyle, good to see you. Carol Monteverde, good to see you. So I'm going to be just keeping an eye out whether I see this person who's suddenly gotten very upset, see if they are in chat. We'll see. Okay, hopefully not. Okay, shall we just dive into the first letter? We're going to try and get from, it sounds like a very long period, but we're going to try and get from August 1886 in Paris to Arles in early 1888. It sounds like an impossible task, but bear in mind there are virtually no letters that Van Gogh is writing to Theo and vice versa, because they're living together. So we should be able to get through about a year and a half fairly quickly. So let's see if we can. Thanks, Terry. I'm kind of a sensitive person, so things like that do. It's not only that you're sort of wondering what lies behind that, like what's going on behind the scenes that you don't know about. At the same time, I got a message today that that TCRS hat that's been taken off Teespring for some kind of legal reason. I'm like, what on earth legal reason could there be for that? And so you're sort of wondering, is there a link between the one thing and another thing? And I don't know, it's a bit disappointing, all I can say. But yeah, so let's focus on. Oh, that's good news. You got your Letters of Van Gogh book yesterday. Is the text legible? Because some people feel like it's quite small. Is it okay for you? It does seem like mindfuckery. Yeah. Okay. So let's get going. So this is a letter from Vincent to someone we've never heard of before, Horace M. Libbins. Sounds like an English dude. October 1886. Oh, so it's written to the English painter who he had met in Antwerp. The text is reproduced without alterations. Okay, my dear Mr. So it's spelled a bit differently here, Liebens. Anyway, it says, since I'm here in Paris, I very often thought of yourself and work. You'll remember that I like your color, your ideas on art and literature, and I add, most of all, your personality. And you see how right at the beginning he's emphasizing liking color. So it's basically the first um, real thought he expresses, in the opening sentence. He says, I've already before now thought that I ought to let you know what I was doing, where I was. But what refrained me was that I find living in Paris is much dearer than in Antwerp. So what he means by that is it's more expensive, right? And he says, not knowing your circumstances, what they are, I dare not say. Come over to Paris from Antwerp without warning you that it costs one dearer, and that if poor, one has to suffer many things, as you may imagine. Now, what's quite sort of ironic with this statement is if you think about not that long ago, Van Gogh was saying to his brother that he needs to come to Paris, blah, 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 to save money. And here he is many months later. He still hasn't sold anything. And he's still talking about um, how expensive the cost of life is, right? Then he says, on the other hand, there is more chance of selling. So he's saying, although it's more expensive here in Paris, because there are more people, there are more art dealerships, I guess, there are more opportunities to sell your work. He says there's also a good chance of exchanging pictures with other artists. And we know that he has done that. And so one presumes that the artists giving their art to one another, exchanging it, is a way of getting their work seen by new potential buyers, new eyes, right? It says, in one word, with much energy, with a sincere personal feeling of color in nature, I would say an artist can get on here, notwithstanding the many obstructions. And I intend remaining here still longer. Well, he will end up remaining where he is for another year and basically a year and a couple of months. But there he refers to a sincere personal feeling of color in nature again. So he's really preoccupied with color, isn't he? There is much to be seen here. For instance, Delacroix, to name only one master. In Antwerp, I did not even know what the Impressionists were. Well, there you have it. There you have it. This is something I've kind of been saying for quite a long time, is that Theo seems to have tried to drum into Van Gogh's thick skull, what about Impressionism? What about color? What about, don't you want to try this? And for whatever reason, Van Gogh has been very pig-headed and has been insisting on the colors of excrement and slime. And only when he sees it for himself does he realize, oh, color, oh goodness. And so there he kind of admits it. I didn't even know what the Impressionists were. Now, I don't think that's strictly speaking true, because in his letters he did reference Impressionism here and there. But I think what he means is that he didn't realize just what a big deal Impressionism was. I think he, in a way, thought the way I left the art market when I was an art dealer, and whatever's happened while I was in Union, it's still the same deal, and it isn't. So in a way, you kind of get the idea it's true of some people. You have such a strength of personality that you, in a way, drown out what seems like a little bit of criticism or a voice that's coming out there. And in other words, it's a failure to listen. And he's at last realized that, recognized that he's failed to appreciate the significance of the Impressionists. Well, until now, and now you can see in the painting behind me that he's really trying to play catch up to that whole thing. What does Lisa say? I'm an art consultant and I'm so enthralled with this whole series. That's great. Yeah, so Alina says, wait a minute, isn't Theo a dealer? It does make you kind of wonder, didn't Theo communicate very clearly, or was his brother just being very obstinate and very pig-headed? It does feel a bit like the latter, doesn't it? What sun sign is Van Gogh? No idea. That is true. Okay. So he talks about, I've seen them, and though not being one of the club yet, I've much admired certain Impressionist pictures. Degas, Claude Monet. So there you have it. So then he says, and now for what regards what I myself have been doing, I've lacked money for paying models, else I had entirely given myself to figure painting. So if he had the money, he would have just been painting, I guess, nudes and models. But I've made a series of color studies in painting simply flowers, red poppies, blue cornflowers, and what's that? Myosotis, white and rose roses, yellow chrysanthemums, seeking oppositions of blue with orange, red and green, yellow and violet, and trying to harmonize brutal extremes, trying to render intense color and not a gray harmony. So he's, this is in a way gray harmony, that not entirely, but it's a pretty gray picture, right? And if you think about Impressionism, quite a lot of Impressionism kind of looks all light blue, like light blue with some vague things in that. And he's quite interested in the idea of contrast. Look at the contrast here of dark blue, and the ground is so such a rich color that it's almost red. So it's almost like red and blue. This part of the painting almost looks like the American flag, red, white, and blue. That red, white, and blue is carried further into the sky. Again, you've got sort of red, white, and blue, and then the green here is also done that way. I quite like this painting. I don't know about you guys. It's got a nice, quaint, cottagey look about it. It's quite a happy picture. So put it up as full screen. But this is something that he did at the end of this period, so he's not quite there yet. at the moment is sort of, it's still a little subdued. It's still looking kind of like that. But the color is definitely coming along. You can see that this yellow is definitely definitively Van Gogh, right? Okay, let's deal with this. Okay, so he says, now alter these gymnastics. I lately did two heads which I dare say are better in light and color than those I did before. By the way, if you want to follow, I'll put a link in the chat. Okay. Then he says, as we said at the time, in color, seeking life, the true drawing is modeling with color. So he's talking about seeking life, seeking that quality of the spirit of life, the spark of life, by finding one's way to that through color, right? Okay, so it goes on to say, I did a dozen landscapes too, frankly green, frankly blue. So I think what he means by the frankly is that it's kind of bright and it's distinctly blue and distinctly green. It's not like it's a slimy brown green or it's a slimy brown or whatever. You know, it's basically a bright color. Anyway, it says, so I'm struggling for life and progress in art. So there is almost a self-identifying mission. He says, I'm struggling for life and progress in art. Okay, so it goes on to say, now I would very much like to know what you are doing and whether you ever think of going to Paris. If you ever did come here, write to me before, and I will, if you like, share my lodgings and studio with you so long as I have any. In spring, say February or even sooner, I may be going to the south of France, the land of the blue tones and gay colors. So can you see he's already got that thought in his mind, even though he said something about, I plan on being here for a lot longer. Look here, if I knew you had longings for the same, we might combine. So, in a way, what he's actually suggesting here is that I think he's offering to this other artist that they maybe go together to the south of France. He's trying to find a friend to start a studio somewhere else. And he's going to continue that process. And eventually he's going to make contact with Paul Gogh and get his ear and get him tentatively interested in that whole project. He says, I felt sure at the time that you are a thorough colorist. And since I saw the Impressionists, I assure you that neither your color nor mine, as it is developing itself, is exactly the same as their theories. But so much, dare I say, we have a chance and a good one finding friends. I hope your health is all right. I was rather low down in health when in Antwerp, but got better here. Write to me in any case. Remember me to, you mentioned a couple of artist names, but I've not often thought of them as I did think of you almost daily. Shaking hands cordially, yours truly, Vincent. Then he says, my present address is that. Rue Le Pic, Paris. With regard, my chances of sale here, though, certainly not much, but still, I do have a beginning. So he's aware that he can't sell anything, but he feels like he's made a start. Now, in terms of that progress, he goes on to say, at the present moment, I've found 4 dealers who have exhibited studies of mine, and I've exchanged studies with many artists. So that's progress of a sort. He's exhibited his art, but no one has really responded to it thus far. Now the prices are 50 francs, certainly not much, but as far as I can see, one must sell cheap to rise, and even at costing price. And mind, my dear fellow, Paris is Paris. There's but one Paris, and however hard living may be here, and if it became worse and harder even, The French air clears up the brain and does good, a world of good. I've been in Corman's studio for 3 or 4 months, but I did not find that so useful as I'd expected it to be. It may be my fault, however. Anyhow, I left it too, as I left Antwerp, and since I worked alone, and fancy that since I feel my own self more. I think it's very interesting language there. Him saying that is basically saying, I'm aware of my own identity. I'm aware of what I want. I'm aware of what I want to say. I'm aware of my journey. I'm not. I don't really want to be told what to do. I don't really want to be institutionalized, if that's the word. Then he says, trade is slow here. The great dealers sell Malay, Delacroix, Corot, Dubigny, Duprier, and a few other masters at exorbitant prices. They do little or nothing for young artists. The second-class dealers, contrary-wise, sell those at very low prices. If I asked more, I would do nothing, I fancy. However, I have faith in color. Think about those words. I have faith in color. Imagine saying that to someone. I'm a little bit worried about this. I'm not sure about that, but you know what? I've got faith in color. Okay. Even with regards to the price, the public will pay for it in the long run. But for the present, things are awfully hard. Therefore, let anyone who risks to go over here consider that there is no laying on roses at all. It reminds me of that saying, life's not a bed of roses. Well, he's saying, well, think about it, there's no laying on roses at all. What is to be gained is progress, and what the deuce that is to be found here. I dare say anyone who has a solid position elsewhere, let him stay where he is. But for adventurers as myself, I think they lose nothing in risking more. Especially as in my case, I'm not an adventurer by choice, but by fate, and feeling nowhere so much myself a stranger as in my family and country. Quite interesting words there. He's saying he feels like a stranger in his country. He feels like a stranger in his family. Anyone else ever feel that way? Have I seen Vincent's The Mulberry Tree? Let's have a look at it. Typing with one hand. Yeah, it's quite stunning, eh? I'm don't want to offend you, but I seem to remember there being a question about the authenticity of this artwork. Anyway, this is it. Can you guys see that? Just want to check that. Not sure if I'm imagining it. Okay, I can't find anything that disputes the originality of it. Anyway, yeah, so anyway, there it is. I don't see his name on this painting. I don't see Vincent anywhere here. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but anyway, there it is. That's one thing I don't like about the whole Van Gogh thing is you've always got to wonder, are you dealing with a genuine Van Gogh or not? Anyway, thanks for letting me know. Alina says it looks like a Van Gogh to me. Kristen says I absolutely love that one. Okay. Anyway, we're getting a bit ahead of our schedule. We still in the Paris period, so let's go back to that. We've now finished this first letter, and it says here, according to John Rewald of New York, this letter was first published in the Sunday Times, London, February 17, 1929. So it's quite interesting that that this letter would come back to life 50 years later. You know, imagine you write a letter to someone and it appears in the newspaper 50 years later. That's some kind of legacy you're leaving, right? And certainly at this point, he doesn't seem to be achieving very much. He's not selling any work. He doesn't really have a girlfriend. He's in a kind of a limbo. He's fallen out of kind of an art school. He's not getting along terribly well with his brother, and we're going to deal with that in a second. Let's see if I can actually pull that up now. Just give me a second. I think it's muted, so you're not going to be able to hear this. But I just want to see if I can bring that up. Let's try again. I want to show you something in Painted with Words where his brother talks about what a horrible person is to live with. So let's just see if I can show you. I'll show you in a second. I'll just move it up. Okay, I think we are around about where we need to be. So the one thing that you're not going to see in the letters right now, the one thing that is sort of missing is that, right? The absinthe. And so Van Gogh is in Paris. He's painting and is doing his thing. But one of the things he's also doing that you're not going to really see acknowledged is drinking absinthe. And this is unfortunately a habit he picks up in Paris. He takes with him to Arles, and things do not turn out well when he drinks. Um, and um, and so it also starts to ruin his relationship with Theo. So let's see if we can listen to it. I'm going to have to, I think, remove this and then add it again in order to how am I going to do this? Okay, let me do this. Stop screen. Okay, now I'm going to try and add it again, this time with sound. Okay, you guys ready? So I'm going to keep it fairly small, and I want you to listen to what he says about the absinthe. So you already getting a sense that is indulging certain appetites. Well, what do you think those appetites are? Something, right? And then something else, and sometimes something and something else together, right? And so he goes on to talk about what impact this has on Theo. So that's also important to stress, is that his health was already fragile when he came to Paris. And although I think maybe an aspect of it improved, um, another aspect of it went in the wrong direction. So, in other words, if he's got syphilis, then drinking absinthe, especially the way that he was drinking it, was going to be very bad for his health. In other words, um, if his state of mind was fairly good, and if he was eating fairly well, and if he was in a fairly positive frame of mind, then everything was okay. But once he went down a downward spiral, it would be a very, very long downward fall, because he would drink more, he would probably womanize more, and then his health would kind of go off a cliff. Can you see that? Right? Okay, so let's play just this next little piece. So why do you think his relationship with Theo becomes strained? Like, what are a couple of reasons for that? I think that the obvious one is, it's one thing to be somewhere else trying to sell your work, and you write a letter and Theo writes back and he sends you money. I think it's quite a different thing when you get up in the morning, you've got to look at your brother who's an art dealer, and look at how he's dressed. He's kind of quite well dressed, quite presentable. He has his own home, he has his own life. And yeah, you are kind of bumming off your brother, and your brother knows that and sees that. And also there's that desperate existential crisis that an artist is in, which is, it's hard enough being an artist trying to sell um, your work without someone looking at you every day like you're a failure. He was not trying to think that or even say that, but it's kind of the elephant in the room, right? And it's not as though Theo sells furniture for a living, or Theo sells shares, or Theo is a bookseller. Theo sells art. And here is his brother churning out art and not being able to sell anything day after day, week after week, month going into month, summer going into autumn, autumn going into winter, winter going into spring, and he still doesn't sell anything. And his brother's got all of these ideas, but ultimately none of that happens. And so you can also imagine that the stress of that situation, like, I live with my brother who's an art dealer, I'm an artist, but I just can't sell any art, um, is something that creates a constant tension, a constant stress. And doesn't he want to drown some of that, um, that take the edge off by drinking? And maybe it works for a while, but then also, if he drinks excessively, then he becomes someone who is in the house with a hangover, and maybe has vomited in the basin, and smells, and all sorts of other things, right? And maybe has sort of boozy arguments with his brother, where he is less inclined to hold himself back, right? So this is one of the interesting ironies of their relationship, is that they um, they have this incredible relationship, um, kind of an unlikely relationship, and yet, yeah, you have the relationship kind of unraveling. They're starting to argue, they're not really getting along, and even though Vincent's dependent on Theo, he feels like he can't even live with Theo anymore, even though he's still dependent on him. And so it's a scenario where he then elects to leave, and yet they still stay friends. They despite them arguing, that they go away, still able to be civil to one another, and Theo still supports his brother. So, despite what could have been an extremely serious hiccup, amounts to a bit of a bump on the road, and the reason for this is that he's struggling to sell his art, but also that he's drinking while struggling to sell his art. And the reason why this is so important to highlight now is you kind of got to say, when Vincent lives with a person, what happens? When Vincent lives with a person and drinks, what happens? When Vincent lives with a person and drinks and he can't sell his art, what happens? And you got your answer with Theo. The answer is that he's argumentative, he's selfish, he's not nice to be around. He shows another side to himself. Things don't work out. And this is with someone who's got a really good relationship with his own brother. And now you've got to compare that to what happens when he lives with Paul Gogh. When someone who doesn't know him really very well comes to stay with him, and that person is now selling his art and he's not. That person is a bit more successful than he is. That person can handle certain things, and and also, can that person handle a drunk Vincent van Gogh? And I think the answer is no one can handle a drunk Vincent van Gogh, right? Not even Vincent van Gogh. And so it's very important to juxtapose the unraveling of Vincent's relationship with the person that cares most about him, and the situation that's playing out there. You know, he can't sell his art, he's drinking a lot more, and his health is kind of slowly going downhill already at this point. With the Vincent van Gogh in Arles, where you have exactly the same set of circumstances. Um, Health declining, drinking more, can't sell his art, is like caught in a trap kind of thing. Meanwhile, to make it 10 times worse, the artist that's right with him is painting and selling his work, painting and selling his work. That's very invalidating. That's kind of infuriating. It's a little bit like you're a YouTuber with a YouTube channel, and for a whole year, your YouTube channel just remains stagnant. Meanwhile, another YouTuber goes from whatever, 0 to 100,000 subscribers. It's just like, um, what's going on here? Is this fair? You know, and you don't want to have those feelings of whatever the feeling is. It's just not a nice place to be. But anyway, that's the place that he's heading towards from here. So let's play a little bit more from here. I don't want to go too far. So, so this is also what's not really in these letters. The quarreling, obviously not seeing the quarrels in letters, but that is actually what's taking place: drinking, quarreling, arguing, and it's with someone that is very important to him. You know, and that makes it also um, quite heartbreaking that the person he's relying on the most is arguing with him, and he's arguing with that person as well. What is he to do, right? So let's go on to the next letter. So this is a letter from Theo. I'll put a link to it in chat. No sound. Okay. I thought you said there was sound in the beginning. No sound on the videos. Okay, too bad. I did activate sound. I don't really know why it does that. I did. The sound thing is ticked. I've got a feeling it's the video player that I'm using. It's very strange when I use a different video player. It won't let me pause, but the sound works. And on the other video player, it lets me pause, but the sound doesn't work. Just really, really odd. I think the only other way to do it is to on SoundCloud, on StreamYard, um, to instead of clicking the screen, you click the window. So we can try that. Anyway, I tend to get copyright strikes on this if I play anything on this. So if you can't hear the sound, then it's just as well. But yeah, it's too bad. I'm trying to show you guys something and I'm not able to. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. So Theo to Lis, 13th of October, 1885. So now we're going back in time, but then we're going to come forward in time as well. The more people one, this is Theo to his sister, the more people one meets, the more one sees that they hide behind conventional forms of conversation, and that what they say when they pretend to be honest is often so empty and so false. So here you've kind of got a brother of Vincent van Gogh talking about authenticity, right? He says Bongo is a very good friend. So he already knew Joe's brother as early as 1885, but basically months before Van Gogh came onto the scene. He said, he's a good friend, he's different, and we often say to each other that although we meet many people, we meet so few who we find sympathetic. You asked me about Vincent. He's one of those people who has seen the world from nearby and has retreated from it. Right, so he's talking about Vincent in 1885, and he says, we shall now have to wait to see whether he has genius. I do believe it, and a few others with me, amongst them Bongo. Once his work becomes good, he will become a great man. As to success, it may go with him, as with Heyerdahl, valued by some but not understood by the masses. Well, that's exactly what happened, certainly in the beginning. Those, however, who really care whether there's actually something in an artist or whether there's just tinsel will respect him. And in my opinion, that will be sufficient revenge for the displeasure expressed by so many. So that is quite an incredible statement, and it turned out to be totally true, that Van Gogh wasn't just tinsel, and that he did deserve the respect that he ultimately got. Anyway, so here's a letter from Theo to his mother, and this is June, 2nd of June, 1886. And he says, and at this point they're obviously living together. He says, fortunately, we're doing well in our new apartment. You would not recognize Vincent. He has changed so much, and it strikes other people even more than it does me. So he's changed. How do you think he's changed? How would you say Vincent has changed in 1886? Are you guys having sound problems? Buffering from time to time. So some of you say his appearance has changed. Some say he's become short-tempered. Some say he's still very thin. I tend to go with what Chelsea says, that he's actually become more social. He's become kind of a social animal. He used to be very withdrawn. Now he's socializing, drinking, um, doing other things while drinking, right? So I think he changes in that he becomes more of a lively, colorful, sociable person, but he also changes in the sense that color infects his art. In other words, he comes alive as a person, and his art comes alive, I guess, through his personality, through his changing personality. And then this confirms that his health was in serious jeopardy even before he came to Paris. Theo says, Vincent has undergone an important operation in his mouth, for he has lost almost all his teeth through the bad condition of his stomach. The doctor says that he has now quite recovered. So what happened in Antwerp is in a way a big red flag that this is what can happen to Vincent van Gogh's health when he doesn't have money, when he is painting a lot of models, and you know what that actually means. And I guess when he's stressed, and I guess you could add to that when it's winter time. So if he's not eating properly, if he's drinking excessively, and he's allowing circumstances to get him down, then he can have a very serious, like not just a slight health shock, but the kind of serious health shock where, like in one case, he loses his teeth. And I think you could argue that when he loses his ear, that's another kind of health shock that he's suffering, this time psychological. Would you guys agree with that? Anyway, his next letter is Theo to his mother. It's about a month later, 2 weeks to a month later, July 1886. Vincent is progressing tremendously in his work, and this is proved by the fact that he is becoming successful. It's quite a strange comment to make. He's becoming successful, but he's not sold any paintings for money. So I guess the way I think he's exaggerating a little bit to his mother. I think it makes more sense to say he is progressing, right? Anyway, he says he is exchanging his work for other pictures. In that way, we obtain a fine collection, which of course, also has a certain value. There is a picture dealer who has now taken 4 of his paintings and has promised to arrange for an exhibition of his work next year. He's mainly painting flowers. So Vincent is mainly painting flowers with the object to put a more lively color into his next set of pictures. So there you have it again and again, this emphasis on color. Yeah, you 100% right. He is about to paint sunflowers. He's about to paint some of the most famous paintings that he will paint. I like that little emoticon with the teeth. That definitely is summing him up, right? Okay. He's also more cheerful than in the past, and people here like him. So remember, I said earlier, how do you think he's changed? Well, he's become more sociable. Well, I think it's because he's become, you could say, because he's less withdrawn, he's a happier person, and as a result, people want to be around him. Or because he's around a lot of people, he's happier, and then it leads to him socializing more. But the point is, he is around people a lot more, and in a way, that is going to be something that tests him when he goes to Arles, because the one thing the one thing that he's got going for him in Paris is that he kind of has a social life, that he is around people, is not lonely, right? I think you could actually say for the first time, I don't want to say the first time in his life, but the first time in many years, he isn't lonely. And so guess what's going to happen now? When he leaves Paris, guess what's going to happen? Deborah says he's gaining confidence because more people are interested to look at his art. And I mean, his art is improving. It has to. All of those executions have got to improve one upon the other. So what do you think is going to happen when he leaves Paris? Well, he's going to be lonely again, and the loneliness is going to be so much worse because it's not that he's just somewhere else and he's alone. He's somewhere else waiting for someone to join him, someone who said is going to join him, and then that person just never really pictures up. The person says, "Okay, I'm coming," and then he doesn't come. Don't worry, I'm making arrangements, but then another month goes by, and that in a way causes Van Gogh's sense of self to kind of unravel. He feels himself lonely. He's depending on someone joining him. He's hoping for that. He's counting on that. And so when it doesn't happen, he kind of finds himself falling lower and lower and lower, right? And then that person does join him, and that all of that anticipation now amounts to something. And then what happens after that? Can you see how it's a pretty huge blow that hits him? Okay, let's continue. He says, to give you proof that people like him, hardly a day passes that he's not asked to go to the studies of well-known painters, or they come to see him. And that is actually mentioned in that clip that I've just played, where Theo, in the dramatized version, is quoting from this letter. Hardly a day passes that he's not asked to go to the studios of well-known painters, or they come to see him. He also has acquaintances who give him a bunch of flowers every week, which may serve him as models. If we are able to keep it up, I think his difficult times are over, and he will be able to make it by himself. So that's quite a big statement. Theo believes that his brother is about to make it, is about to reach the big time. Then Theo writes to his mother, and now we're going kind of into the future slightly. February 1887, this is just before he goes to Arles. He says he has painted a few portraits which have turned out well, but he always does them for no payment. It's a pity that he does not seem to want to earn something. So he's painting portraits, but it seems like Theo is aggravated that Vincent doesn't demand payment for these portraits. And then he feels used. I think Theo feels used because it's like, oh, well, I'm getting money from my brother. I don't need to ask you for money. And so he says, for if he did, he could make some money here. Well, you can't change a person. So you kind of get a sense of resignation from Theo, that he's actually starting to get quite pissed off about the money side of things. Then an unusual letter. It's a letter from Theo to his other brother. Did you know that Vincent and Theo both had another brother, Gogh, who actually came to South Africa, and his brother died here in South Africa. This is the 11th of March, 1887. He says, Vincent continues his studies and he works with talent, but it is a pity that he has so much difficulty with his character. So here again is Theo acknowledging that things aren't, that there's trouble in paradise, that things aren't really going that well between the two Van Gogh brothers. And he says, in the long run, it is quite impossible to get on with them. He's writing to Gogh to say, you know, I'm not really getting along with Vincent. And so he says, when he came here last year, he was difficult, but I thought I could see some progress. So it's like he knows that his brother's a stubborn person, and then he thought, oh, it looked like he was improving somewhat. And then he says, but now he is his old self again, and he won't listen to reason. That does not make it too pleasant here at home, and I hope for a change. That change will come, but it is a pity for him, for if we had worked together, it would have been better for both of us. So Theo is actually feeling like I wish things had worked out here, because then, he is progressing. I wish he could just deal with his own obstinacy and his own social awkwardness and his, whatever you call it, that that very strong sense of who he is, and that he can't give that up. Because he's saying, that would work out better for both of us. And I think what he means is, well, now he's going to have to end up paying the piper while his brother goes somewhere else again. Anyway, he says, have you heard they're going to make an iron tower? This is really amazing. They're going to make an iron tower 300 meters high here. So that's obviously news of the Eiffel Tower, and it's coming through in this letter in March 1887, right? So, and by the time Van Gogh returns to Paris, remember, at the time that they're building the Eiffel Tower, Van Gogh is going to leave Paris. And by the time he comes back, the Eiffel Tower will be partially constructed. So anyway, he says that must mean a lot of work. So he's thinking about that in terms of employment opportunities. And Gogh is an engineer, right? And so I think he's thinking about it. Maybe you should come and work here in Paris. And instead, Gogh decides to go and work as a railway engineer in South Africa. And then, as luck will have it, shortly after arriving, South Africa went over into the Boer War, and Gogh fought on the side of the Boers, and then he died. So Gogh was heading towards a war, but here is a little bit of a suggestion. They're going to build an iron tower here. It might mean a lot of work. He says, it seems it has been terribly difficult to figure out in what way it would be possible to keep it standing. But the designer Eiffel tells us that 10 years ago it would not have been possible to make that calculation. So there's a kind of a revolution going on in the world. They are making progress in engineering. They're making progress in things like electricity and vaccines, and they're about to start the production lines of cars and start building aeroplanes. So the world is about to change. And part of that change we see in Vincent van Gogh's art as well. I mean, Starry Night is in a way a early recognition that the stars in the sky above us aren't just stars in the sky. The stars in the sky are galaxies and fireballs and more than just little pinpricks. And so almost that same idea is infecting the entire world, that there's a lot going on, that atoms and germs and viruses exist, and so on and so on and so on. So now let's go to a letter from Theo to his sister Vil, for Wilhelmine, and it's dated 14th of March. So it's written 3 days after the letter to his brother. I can't tell you how much good your latest letter has done me. In difficult days, it is so much to know that there is someone who wants to help bring things to a good end. And I'm often ungrateful enough to imagine that I stand all alone, and then the difficulties seem insurmountable, and it seems there's no way out. Now, bear in mind, Theo is like the long-suffering brother in the middle. Vincent has become estranged from his mother and his sisters, and his only real family, and his other brother, his only real family is Theo. And Theo isn't getting along with Vincent either. So Theo's kind of feeling like the odd man out, like in the sense of he's trying to look after Vincent, but he is still on good terms with his mother and his sisters and his brother. Anyway, he goes on to say, your letter proves to me that I'm wrong. This is such a special case. If he was someone who had a different kind of job, I would certainly have done what you advised me a long time ago. And I've often asked myself whether it was not wrong always to help him. This is an incredible admission from Theo. I've often wondered, am I wrong to help Vincent? Am I helping him into the grave? Am I kind of an enabler of his dependency? Right? It's quite an incredible admission there. Deborah, as far as I know, Gustav Eiffel designed the Eiffel Tower, but that's as far as I know. So the other thing that comes through here is that you can see that his family have advised him to stop helping him, stop helping Vincent. Stop. He needs to get a proper job. You can totally imagine those conversations taking place. Stop helping him. He needs to get a proper job. He needs to look after himself. He needs to become a man in a way. And if you think about, it's a terrible comparison to make, but if you think about Brian Laundrie getting handouts from his family, Brian Laundrie, excuse me, and what Brian Laundrie needed to do was figure out how to make a living, right? Instead of feeling threatened by someone else and being dependent on someone else, he needs to not turn to mommy and daddy, and he needs to get going. And so they're having this exact same conversation with Vincent, and the conversation is, stop helping him. And Theo is thinking, you know what, maybe you're right. I've often been on the verge of letting him muddle along by himself. There's an admission. And it's such an incredible statement, because on the one hand, you feel like that would be the right thing to do, right? That would be the right thing to do. And also, but also, would we have gotten the art of Vincent van Gogh if Theo had cut ties with his brother? If he had said, "Tough love, pal. You need to pay your rent from now on," right? But the other thing to emphasize, and it's something that Stephanie's raised here, is this idea of not supporting Vincent has been there all along. His family have been saying, stop helping him, really all along. And Theo has been in two minds about it. So again, the official reason why Vincent took his life, was that he feared that Theo would stop supporting him. Well, Theo never said, "I'm going to stop supporting you." In fact, the very last letter that Vincent wrote to Theo, it was to ask for a much bigger than usual art order. So it doesn't make any sense. If you don't know the Van Gogh story, then you would say, you know what, it does make sense that he was really worried that he would be a burden to his brother. But he'd been a burden to his brother for years and years and years. And look at how he was a burden to his brother. He was getting drunk in his brother's own home. He wasn't that kind of person to be that worried about it. He was a burden to his parents when he lived with them, where he had like an affair with a neighbor, with the neighbor who was the daughter of a pastor, and he didn't mind doing that. So can you see, it just doesn't really make sense. And so you've got proof that the idea of supporting his brother was something that he felt conflicted about, but to his credit, Theo persevered, and as a result, we've got this incredible archive of art as a result of his support, which in a way didn't make any sense. That's true. Okay, so let's go. It's quite an amazing letter, right? So he goes on to say, after getting your letter again, seriously, I again seriously thought about it, meaning cut Vincent loose, and I feel that in the circumstances, I cannot do anything but continue. It is certain that he is an artist, and what that's quite interesting the way he says it. And what he makes now may sometimes not be beautiful, but it will surely be of use to him later, and then it may possibly be sublime. And it would be a shame if one kept him from his regular studies. However impractical he may be, and when he becomes more skillful, the day will undoubtedly come when he will start selling. You should not think that it is the money side that worries me the most. That's quite an interesting point as well. It is mostly the idea that we sympathize so little anymore. There was a time when I loved Vincent a lot and he was my best friend, but that is over now. Quite a big statement. It seems to be even worse from his side, for he never loses an opportunity to show me that he despises me and that I revolt him. And you can imagine that these statements, these expressions come through when he's drunk, right? When he is recovering from being drunk, when he's coming out of a episode of debauchery. Anyway, he says that makes the situation at home almost unbearable. So he's saying, it's actually unbearable living with this guy. And so again, you must think, if this is the situation, living with a brother who actually loves him, what happens when he lives with Paul Gogh and he starts arguing with him and he starts being himself with Paul Gogh? So again, do you think it's so unlikely that Paul Gogh cut off this guy's ear because he was just so much in his face one night? Anyway, now he describes why things are so unbearable living with Vincent. He says, nobody wants to come and see me, for that always leads to reproaches. And he is also so dirty and untidy that the household looks far from attractive. All I hope is that he will go and live by himself, and he has talked about this for a long time. But if I told him to leave, that would only give him a reason to stay on. Since I cannot do any good for him, I only ask for one thing, and that is that he won't do any harm to me, and that is what he does by staying, for it weighs heavily on me. This is a very heavy statement that he's making. He's saying, I can't live with this guy. I don't know how to help him. If I tell him to leave, he'll stay. If I ask him to stay, he'll leave. It appears as if there are two different beings in him, the one marvelously gifted, fine and delicate, the other selfish and heartless. And that if you were wondering what you missed in terms of the audio, well, that is exactly what was narrated. They appear alternately so that one hears him talk now this way and then that way, and always with arguments to prove pro and contra. Is a pity he is his own enemy, for he makes life difficult not only for others but also for himself. So I think that also tells you a lot. He is his own enemy, and someone who is his own enemy can create enemies with other people. And isn't that what he did with Paul Gogh? Isn't that what he did with Dr. Gachet? That he made friends with him, and then he totally ruined his relationship when he got drunk, when he preyed on their girlfriend, Paul Gauguin's girlfriend, or Dr. Gachet's daughter, right? But look at that. He makes life difficult for himself, right? I've firmly decided to continue as I've done up to now, but I hope that for some reason or another he will move to other quarters, and I will do my best for that. So we're getting quite a lot of background on the Van Gogh. That's not a very nice chap. He smells. He's selfish. He's hard to live with. He seems to be quite insensitive. Then Theo Toulis. 19 April 1887. I don't remember when I wrote you last, and if I've already told you my secret, right? Have I already told you my secret? Do you think you know what it is? To get straight to the point, if you don't know yet, I'm planning at one time or other to ask for Joe Bonga's hand. She's planning on getting engaged. So you can imagine this is also weighing on their relationship. Theo wants to keep a girlfriend. He wants to take her out to dinner. He wants to spend time with her. How does Vincent feel about that? He wants to buy her dresses or flowers. How does Vincent feel about that? How does Vincent feel about the fact that his brother, who's younger than him, can have a serious, meaningful relationship with someone, but he can't? Anyway, he says, I surely don't know her enough to be able to tell you much about her. As you know, I've only seen her a few times, but the things I know about her appeal to me. She gives me the impression that I could trust her in a completely undefinable way, more than anyone else. That's an incredible insight he has, because she ends up being the most trustworthy and the most reliable and the most solid person in a way in this whole story, because Vincent dies, Theo dies, and it's up to Joe to do something with all of this. It's really thanks to Joe that the Van Gogh legacy actually survives, because Van Gogh doesn't actually achieve it on his own, and Theo doesn't achieve it on his own either. And so it's thanks to. Can you imagine if Theo married um, like a farm girl, like someone who, or maybe she was, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of someone who, as far as I know, Joe was she could read English, and I think she was an English teacher. I'm just trying to think. Can you imagine if Joe was an ice skater? Would she have been interested in art, and would she have tried to, and would she have known how to promote Van Gogh's work? Can you imagine if she was a coal miner or a nuclear physicist or a doctor? But the fact that she was a teacher meant that she knew how to teach, to show, to get Van Gogh's work where it needed to go, and she also appreciated its value. He says, I think I could talk with her about anything, and I believe that if she wanted it, she could mean very much to me. It is extremely doubtful whether Johanna would want me. That's her name. So he's quite modest about his chances. He says, I can't stop thinking about her. She's always with me, and very often I curse the terrible distance that lies between us. You do kind of get the idea that he met her when he went to visit Bonga's parents, that's Andre's parents, and that left a really strong impression on Theo, but also on her. Um, then he says, why can't I see her more often and get to know her better in order to know what she would wish and what she thinks of all kinds of things? How could I possibly get in contact with her in another way than I do now, being in Amsterdam once a year for 1 or 2 days and then finished? I've thought of beginning to write to her, but that is not possible either at the moment, since I was stupid enough last year not to ask her if she wanted to correspond with me. Don't think that when I go into details, it is all other people's fault. No, the main reason was that I was ill, especially mentally, and that I had a hard struggle with myself. And then this second last letter, Theo to Bill, 26 April 1887. He says, a lot has changed since I last wrote to you. We have made peace. I think that's, um, I don't know if that's between him and his sister or him and his brother. But he says, for it did not do anybody any good to continue in that way. I hope it will last. So there will be no change, and I'm glad. It would have been strange for me to live alone again, and he would not have gained anything either. So I think that is peace with Vincent, that they've argued, and they eventually made friends again. I asked him to stay. That will seem strange after all I wrote you recently, but it is no weakness on my side, and I feel much stronger than this winter. I'm confident that I will be able to create an improvement in our relationship. We have drifted apart enough than that it would not serve any purpose to make the rift any larger. So having quite deep conversations with his family. Then Theo to his other sister Liz, 15th of May 1887, he says, and at this point Vincent's not there anymore. Vincent is working hard as always and actually is there. He leaves in 1888. Vincent is working hard as always and keeps progressing. His paintings are becoming lighter. And he's trying very hard to put more sunlight into them. So there you have it. Vincent is aware that his art needs to change. Vincent's aware that that they've been dark and dreary, and he's realizing he needs to liven them up. And so he ends off saying something quite interesting. He says, he's a curious chap, but what a head he has got, most enviable. So there seems to be some respect there in his brother's brilliance, in his brother's intelligence, right? Okay, let's go on to the next letter. So at this point, Vincent's 33 years old. So this is a very rare letter. There are not many of them, but it's a letter from Vincent to Theo in the summer of 1887. He says, my dear friend, encloses a letter which arrived yesterday, but which the concierge didn't give me straight away. I've been to the Tambourine if I hadn't gone, they would have thought I was afraid. And I told La Segatori that I wouldn't pass judgment on her in this matter, but that it was for her to judge herself. I'm just trying to think. La Segatori, I think some people believe that Van Gogh had a relationship with her. Some people think that Van Gogh had a relationship with this lady. So I'm going to take you guys through this Wikipedia page briefly. Oh, can you guys see that? Make it a bit bigger. And can you see she's drinking as well? So maybe he drinks with her. So he says, so let's just deal with the Wikipedia page. It says, Agostina Segatori, and I think she's Italian, sitting in the Café du Tambourine, was painted by Vincent van Gogh in 1887. She's the owner of the cafe, and he was probably one of her best customers. And it says that Van Gogh knew, I don't know if it's knew her intimately or knew the cafe intimately or knew her and the cafe intimately, but her cafe was a gathering spot for Parisian artists. It's where they exhibited their work. And Van Gogh couldn't pay for his meals in cash, so he gave her paintings. And once again, I've said this in the past, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that Van Gogh only ever sold one painting. That's true. He only ever sold, like, take my painting, give me money, that's a sale. But he actually traded quite a lot of things for his art. He traded accommodation, meals, this, that, and the next thing. And so this is an example of that, where he traded. You must imagine that he painted quite a lot of paintings and then got meals in exchange for that, right? And that's something, you know. So the other thing is he held a special exhibit of his Japanese prints in the cafe as well, in her cafe. You can understand that Augustina went bankrupt because of this whole approach to taking art instead of money. But the irony is that Van Gogh's paintings were confiscated by creditors, and obviously they would go on to be worth millions, right? I don't know if they would be prepared to wait that long, but anyway. So 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 you can see when you have a look at this painting. Let's put it up a bit bigger. It's still kind of dreary. It's still got a bit of potato eaters in it. It's very green. There's a little bit of color. Look at the blue over there. I think that's a hat that she's wearing. In the background is what looks like a Japanese print, right? But and there's, look at the bright yellow on those chairs. Can you see that? But besides that, and besides that little bit of orange on the side of the table, and the yellow of the stools and her dress, it's a fairly dreary picture. This is kind of grey. It's got a little bit of a impressionist vibe to it, the sort of grey blue vibe, but overall it's still caught up in dreary colours. I just want to see if there's anything else. So Augustina was a woman in her 40s. She, I think, was older than Van Gogh at that time by about, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. You can also see that she smokes. She's got a cigarette in her hand. And so he obviously makes friends with her. And because they socialize, he socializes in the cafe with everyone who comes to the cafe. And we know that later on he would paint a painting called The Night Cafe in Arles. So he kind of got into the whole vibe of hanging out in cafes and drinking in cafes. And maybe drinking was a way that he drowned his sorrows, but also felt that he could socialize with people he didn't really know. What's interesting with the painting also is that it suggests that this was her second glass of beer, because if you look closely, there are two saucers here. So a beer would come with a saucer. So the fact that there are two saucers here suggests that this is her second beer. Quite interesting. So this is really a theme: a woman sitting at a table, and you know, just like that theme, woman sitting at table, was a kind of impressionist theme used by other impressionist artists like Edgar Degas and Edouard Manet. So let's have a look if we can see any of their women at tables. So here are men at tables. Quite a nice painting. That's from Degas, and it's 1873. Let's see if we can. Are there any women sitting at tables? Oh, this is a beautiful Degas. Quite stunning, isn't it? Now, if you ask me, do Van Gogh's paintings really outmatch, for example, that? Has Van Gogh painted a single painting that's actually better than what you're seeing on screen right now? And I would say no. In other words, in terms of the style and the artistic skill, I would say no. But I would say, for example, Starry Night is a more creative painting, and the context within which it was painted is far, far, far richer. I would say that. But in terms of the actual execution, this is far, far, far superior to, I mean, compare this to The Potato Eaters, compare this to Portrait of Dr. Geshe. It's much better, much, much better. And so you might say, so why all the fuss about Vincent van Gogh? It's because of the drama, the struggle to get to where he was trying to go. And you might say, he wasn't really a very good artist, but he did end up creating some, not many, but some very special works of art. And those works of art have stood out compared to incredible artists like this. So let's just see if there's a woman in a chair that Gogh paints. Here we go. There we go. So that's the kind of thing Van Gogh was trying to, I guess, emulate. Right? Van Gogh is trying to emulate what the Impressionists are doing by doing, look at that picture and then look at this picture. Right? It's the same kind of thing. Same kind of thing. And if you look at this, this is fairly dreary. The coloring is sort of grays and tans, right? And Vincent's still used to those sort of colors. Does that make sense? Can you see how Vincent's trying to, you may be overthinking the whole art thing, but he certainly is thinking about it. So let me show you another Degas. It's called Place de la Concorde. It's also quite interesting. I've actually been there during the Tour de France, but definitely artist I like. What do you guys say? Isn't that also quite, that looks like almost photoreal? Musicians in the Orchestra, painted in 1872. This is at the races. This is woman combing her hair. Right? I think it should be naked woman combing her hair, to be honest. Are there any more that I can show you? I'm just trying to see if there are any that involve a woman sitting. This painting kind of makes me think about how society was changing. This is a circus performer, studies of a circus performer, and it just gives you an idea what was happening at the time, that you had circus acts as well, that Paris in the 1870s and 1880s was quite a lively, interesting place, and they were coming up with all sorts of ways to entertain themselves. They didn't have TV, so they had circuses inside these big halls, right? So anything else I can show you? Portraits of the Stock Exchange. So that's from 1879. That's something else that was a fairly different thing, stock exchange. Imagine being a country bumpkin and then you kind of have a stock exchange. This picture, Dances, is being held at the Princeton University Museum in the States. You can see there's quite a lot of variety to his work. And here's another woman sitting in a chair. Mary Stevenson. It looks like she's holding cards or a fan. So it's Mary Cassett seated holding cards. Here's another woman seated holding, well, I don't know what she's holding, but the woman seated. Also Mary Cassett. Oh, sorry, that's a self-portrait. That's not actually by Degas. Here are a couple of additional pictures of person sitting in a chair. Now, this one's called The Amateur. This one's actually at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And then there are quite a few others that just involve people sitting in chairs. Shall I put this on screen? Guys sitting in a chair, guys sitting on a sofa. This one's Edward Manet. Yeah. But all of these pictures give you a sense of what Paris looked and felt like in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. Ballets, cafes, concerts, circuses, singers, right? As I say, remember they didn't have television. Yeah, you have two women sitting on a bench. There's another woman sitting in a shop. Woman sitting over there. And then nudes. And so on. Okay. Shall we get back to the letters? I hope you found that worth kind of deviating into. I don't know if I bored you guys. Okay. So, I mean, all of that was just going down the rabbit hole of La Segatori. That is Vincent talking about La Segatori. Well, that's the cafe owner. So just by finding out who she is, you get all of that context. So he says, I wouldn't pass judgment on her in this matter, but that is for her to judge herself. That I'd torn up the receipts for the pictures, but that she had to return everything. So I don't know if this has got to do with her going bankrupt, and I don't know what this is about, but he doesn't sound very happy. He says that if she had not had a hand in what happened to me, she would have seen me the next day. That as she didn't come to see me, my feelings was that she knew they were trying to pick a quarrel with me. But she had tried to warn me by saying, go away, which I hadn't understood, and furthermore, perhaps didn't want to understand. So you get a sense that there's some kind of argument or misunderstanding going on. You kind of get the sense that someone was drunk, something was miscommunicated, someone's unhappy, etc., etc. To which she replied that the pictures and all the rest were at my disposal. She maintained that it was I who had tried to pick a quarrel, which doesn't surprise me, knowing that if she sided with me, they would take it out on her. I also saw the waiter when I went in, but he made himself scarce. So he seems to be talking about a brawl. He seems to be talking about some problem at the cafe. He said, when you returned, we would discuss the matter because these pictures belong to you as much as me. And in the meantime, I advised her to think about what had happened again. She didn't look well and was white as a sheet, which isn't a good sign. She didn't know that the waiter had gone up to your place. If that's true, I would be more inclined to believe she had tried to warn me that they were trying to pick a quarrel with me than that she had plotted the whole thing herself. She cannot do as she likes. I'm awaiting your return now before taking any action. So it seems like this, while Theo was away, it seemed like she went bankrupt and the creditors came to take his pictures, and that's what this drama is about. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. Then he says, I've done 2 pictures since you left, have only got 2 Louis left, and I'm afraid I don't know how I'm going to manage from now until your return. Again, I don't have money. don't forget that when I started working at Anseniers, I had plenty of canvases, and Tanguy was very good to me. Um, that is Pierre, that's this guy, or Pierre Tanguy, I think he's either also a cafe owner or is also an art dealer. I'm not quite sure, but this is Pierre. That's the Tanguy that he's referring to. Okay, can you see how much color is got into that? I don't think it's a terribly good picture. It's very colorful, but not. It's not got the skill of Degas, and there's a bit of a hint of the portrait of Dr. Gachet, the coat and the buttons in this particular picture. Do you see that? He goes on to say, he talks about his old witch of a wife realized what was going on and complained. Does seem like Van Gogh has lost his manners, doesn't it? So I gave Tanguy's wife a piece of my mind and told her that it was her fault if I didn't buy anything more from them. Old man Tanguy is sensible enough to keep quiet and will do whatever I want anyway. But with all this work isn't easy. You kind of do get the idea he's become quite rude, quite arrogant, quite nasty. Um, he says, I saw Lautrec today. He's sold a picture through Portier, I think. A watercolor of Mademoiselle Mesdags has arrived, which I find very beautiful. So that's the other thing that must be haunting his steps, is seeing how other artists are selling their work, but he just can't. So who's to blame for that? Mesdags has arrived, which I find very beautiful. Now, I hope you'll enjoy your trip over there. Remember me to my mother, to Cora, and to Vil. And if you could manage by sending me something again to ensure that I don't have too hard a time from now until you get back. Then I shall try to do some more pictures for you, as I'm really very happy as far as my work goes. What worried me a little about this business was that it looked a little cowardly not going there to the Tambourine, and my peace of mind has been restored by my going there. It seems to be that he's saying to his brother, I was right to go to the Tambourine and argue, or whatever. Okay, so at this point, Vincent's 34 years old. And now we go to, so this is from another letter from Vincent to Theo from Paris. Just want to see how many more before we in all. 1, 2, okay, so not that many. So we are almost finished with the Paris period. Boy, has it raced by. So he says, my dear friend, thank you for your letter and for that which it contained. So Theo obviously sent him money. And he says, I feel sad that even successful paintings do not cover their costs. I was touched by what you wrote about home. So there's a quote from Theo. They are fairly well, but yet it is sad to see them. That's quite a touching reference, right, to home. A dozen years ago, one would have sworn that, come what may, the family would always prosper and do well. It would give mother much pleasure if your marriage came off. And you also ought not to stay single for the sake of your health and business. As for me, I feel the desire for marriage and children leaving me. And now and then I'm rather depressed that I should be like this at 35 when I ought to be feeling quite the opposite. So if you're saying that Van Gogh was suicidal because he was lonely, or was suicidal because he didn't have a wife, or because Theo was getting married, he realized, poor me, I don't have a wife. Well, yeah, you see him saying, I don't have a desire to be married. I mean, I don't know how he would pull it off if he did, but Then he says, I sometimes I blame it all on this rotten painting. It was Richepin who said somewhere, the love of art is the undoing of true love. I think that's absolutely right. But on the other hand, true love makes one weary of art. If you can permit me to talk on this subject, I consider myself an artist with words, more than that, but that's one part of who I am. But I do see myself as a person who's got an artistic bone in his body, put it that way. And maybe it's hard to love artistic people, that are quite particular in how they see the world. I think if you don't, my brother's an artist, and he gets such great treatment by people, which is he gets kind of like a credit card, which is like, but he's an artist, like no matter what he does, no matter how crazy he behaves, it's like, but he's an artist. I don't get that credit card at all. And I think because I don't get it, when I do something that's perhaps strange, it's like, wow, you are a jerk, right? Whereas you should be getting that, but he's an artist credit card, right? And I don't think I'm that strange, to be honest. But I do think artists deserve a little bit of leeway in their attitudes to everything. They are original thinkers, and so in some ways they may be a little bit rusty in terms of their how socialized they are, and how they deal with certain things. They may be very clever in knowing and intuiting certain things, but very weak and naive in other things, right? In other worldly affairs. But it is interesting that he says art is the undoing of true love. I think you can be too serious about love as an artist. You be too serious that it's got to be perfect, that it's got to be wonderful, that it's got to be a certain way, and then that can make the object of your affections insecure, or feel they're not good enough when they actually are good enough. Um, I've had quite a few girlfriends complain and say, I was never, them say to me, I was never good enough for you. And I'm like, I never said you were not good enough. You are different to me, and I'm different to you. Um, and I don't know if you can accept me for who I am. That's really where I come from. But it's never been like you not good. Like I feel like I'm not good enough, maybe in like, um, I don't know, certain respects. But I've had quite a few girlfriends say to me, "You make me feel like I'm not good enough," and I feel terrible because it's like, but I never said you're not good enough. And I never felt it either. There's certain things maybe you can't talk about. Um, like the way Van Gogh, I don't know, could he talk about some of his deep, sophisticated impressions of art to the cafe owner, right? And if he can't, it doesn't mean she's not good enough. It simply means they're from different worlds, and there's an area where they're compatible, and there's an area where they're not. That's all. Anyway, he goes on to say, I think that's absolutely right. But on the other hand, true love makes one weary of art. And I think that's also true, is that um, the artist, in a way, his true love maybe is his art, or is a certain area that he's interested in. And the person that he's in love with is kind of an accessory to that, or can be, unless it takes it over. And you might say it's good if it takes over, because who wants to be an artist your whole life? On the other hand, if the art makes who you are. But then he says, true love makes one weary of art. I think an artist in love feels like, well, I would rather make love, and I'd rather hold hands, and I'd rather whatever lie in bed than be making art. It's I'd rather have the fairy tale than the struggle. But of course, it's not very, very a realistic way of thinking about life, It's not like you can jump off the roller coaster into just being in love with somebody. Um, but it is true. I think it's very hard to produce the kind of art and have the kind of story Van Gogh did if you've got a wife and children, because you need all of that energy goes into them instead of going into art. And how many sane people pour that kind of devotion into not a person, right? Not really very many. I don't know if dating another creative is the answer, but I do think the first point is you've got to acknowledge I'm dealing with a slightly alien creature. They think differently. They are different. There are areas that are like common humanity, but there are the areas that are definitely different. Deborah says you've got a friend in me. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's true. That's how I see it. I don't know if it's cruel to think that way. It can be all consuming. Um, Sharon says engineers can also be very strange. Well, interestingly, my brother, who's an artist, has also got 2 degrees in engineering. Okay. Tamara says, is it Tamara? I understand how people may feel. Yeah, but to me, it's you know, like you can be emotionally intelligent, or you can be good with numbers, or you can be good with language. Someone else is good with music, and they're good with people. So it's different kinds of intelligence. That's how I see it. It's not like I am smarter than you. It's I know a bit more than you do in this area. You know a bit more than I do in that area. I like you and need you because you're different, and hopefully you like me and need me because I'm different. Maybe it doesn't work in that sense. Stephanie says my husband's an engineer. Okay, so it's quite interesting this conversation we're having about engineering, because in the middle of this art explosion that's about to occur, the Eiffel Tower is about to be erected, and that's an engineering feat that is still the one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. Okay, let's continue. So he says, although I already feel old and broken, I can still be amorous enough at times to feel less passionate about painting. What an incredible statement. He's basically saying, you know what? I'm a human being. As much as I love art, as much as I'm obsessed about art, as much as I'm on a mission to create art, I still want to, you know, um, be warm and fuzzy. I still want to kiss somebody. I still want to, I can still be amorous enough to not be that, you know, to push the painting aside. Then he says, but one must have ambition to succeed, and ambition seems to me absurd. There you have it. He's saying, I'm, um, I'm not actually very ambitious. But what I do wish is that I were less of a burden to you. And that needn't be impossible from now on, for I hope to make such progress that you'll be able to show, excuse me, what I do in full confidence without compromising yourself. And then I'll retire somewhere in the midi so as not to see many painters who fill me with disgust as men. Can you tell that Van Gogh has become quite a lot more prickly? The Van Gogh that comes out of Paris is a pricklier person than the one that went in. He says, you can be sure of one thing, I shan't be trying to do any more work for the tambourine, that's that cafe. I think it's about to change hands anyway. And I most certainly don't object to that. As far as La Sagatori, that is quite a different matter. I still feel affection for her, and I hope that she too still feels some for me. So this is definitely one of the few occasions ever in like 900 letters that Van Gogh kind of admits feeling something for someone, a woman, and actually that woman feels something for him, and there's not a church going up in flames somewhere. There's not like a village revolting. There's not a bloody ear being traded hands. It's like for the first time, it seems like in his entire life, he's had a girlfriend, he's had a relationship with someone without there being like an earthquake, you know. So he says, I still feel affection for her. And I think, or I hope that she feels the same way. You would imagine that she must feel affection for him if he paints her portrait and if she allows him to pay for meals with paintings. You'd imagine she must like him. He says at the moment she's in a difficult situation. She's neither a free agent nor mistress in her own house, on top of which she's suffering and sick. Although I wouldn't say so in public, I'm convinced she's had an abortion, unless that is, she did have a miscarriage. Whatever in her case, I don't hold it against her. Now, the fact that she's sick makes you wonder, did he pick up something from her? Did all these other artists sleep with her and then he also slept with her? Or did he, I don't know, this just does make you wonder. She'll be better in about 2 months' time, I hope, and then she may well be grateful to me for not having bothered her. Mind you, once she's well again, if she refuses in cold blood to return what is mine, or does me down in any way, I shan't pull my punches. That's quite a thing to say. I mean, is he talking symbolically there? I'm not going to pull my punches in terms of my girlfriend. And as I say, all of this is the prelude to his little tete-a-tete with Paul Gogh. They're going to have a big row as well. So he says, after all, I know her well enough to still have confidence in her. And mind you, if she does manage to hang on to establishment, that's her cafe, then from a business point of view, I shouldn't blame her for choosing to eat rather than be eaten. If that means she has to tread on my toes a bit, all right, she can do so. When I saw her last, she didn't tread all over my heart, which she would have done had she been as mean as people say she is. I saw Tanguy yesterday and he has put a canvas I've just done in the window. I've done 4 since you left and I've got a big one underway. Now, just in this letter, you get a real sense of the social activity that is going on in Van Gogh that you never really got previously. When he was in Antwerp, when he was in Newnan, when he was in all the other places, you don't really get the sense that he's talking to this person and there are these continuous interactions, right? So this was the most social Van Gogh was really ever going to be in his life. And now this period is about to come to an end. And you do wonder if he did stay in Paris, would he have made a breakthrough in some other way? Anyway, he says, I realize that these big, long canvases are hard to sell, but later on people will see that there's fresh air and good humor in them, right? And that's quite important to note, is that he is trying to put humor in his art. Look at this picture, for example. It's one of these, I think. There is a kind of humor in this. It's not something that you laugh at, but I'm just saying there's something good-natured in this setting. There's something of a sort of a fairy tale quality to this, where you see the puffing, these are smokestacks, but it actually almost looks like a steam train or something. Can you see this looks like a pleasant summer scene that you'd want to be part of, right? And that's what I understand when he talks about good humor. Do you agree with that? The whole lot would do well as decoration for a dining room or a country house. I agree with that. And if you were to fall properly in love and then got married, it doesn't seem impossible to me that you might manage to acquire a country house like so many other art dealers. If one lives well, one spends more, but also gains more ground. And perhaps nowadays one does better looking rich than looking hard up. It's better to enjoy life than to commit suicide. There's a very rare reference to that term, and there he says it. Enjoy life. Isn't that what he was doing in the last summer of 1890? He's not saying the opposite. He's saying that, right? Extraordinary. Do you agree? Um, and he's also almost predicting, expecting, anticipating that his brother's going to get married. And he says, it's not impossible that you're going to manage to, you're going to manage. You're going to manage whatever and still be an art dealer. You know, he doesn't see there being a problem in his brother getting married. And then he very briefly just says, regards to all at home. Yeah, and I mean that is the mantra of this channel. That's what I'm trying to share in his letters, is his attempt to live even though he's got so many difficulties. He can't sell his art. He can't kind of get going in his life, but he's trying to make a success out of his life, and he's trying to live, right? Okay, so let's go on to the next letter. So we're going from the summer of 1887 to the fall, essentially. And this is a very rare letter from Vincent to his sister. And he says, my dear little sister, I thank you very much for your letter, but for my part, I hate writing these days. Still, there are some questions in your letter which I should like to answer. To begin with, I must disagree with you when you say you thought Theo looked so wretched this summer. I think he's saying that as if to say, Theo's not sick, Theo's not pathetic, Theo's not weak, and thus I'm not a burden to Theo. In other words, if Theo is wretched, then don't be more of a burden to him in his weakened condition. So he's kind of saying, no, he's not wretched. Personally, I think that on the contrary, I think I may need to go and get another glass of water. I think on the contrary, Theo's appearance has become a great deal more distinguished during the past year. One has to be strong to stand life in Paris for as many years as he has done. But it might have been that Theo's family and friends in Amsterdam and The Hague didn't treat him or even receive him with the cordiality he deserved from them and was entitled to expect. On that score, I can tell you that he may have felt hurt, but is otherwise not at all bothered. After all, he is doing business, even in these particularly bad times, for the picture trade. Why do you think these are particularly bad times for the picture trade? We have covered it before. Okay, I'm going to go and get a letter and I'm going to await your answer. Why do you think this is a particularly bad time for the picture trade? Tell me what you're doing. Okay, that is right. Well done. That's right. And so that is, in a way, think about it. Isn't the reason why we've got these extraordinary these extraordinary paintings because artists had to push themselves? Because artists were confronted with this idea of, well, now you've got a machine that can just represent a scene. And so how do I do better than that? Can you see that? You literally had the artists challenged to work harder, do better at interpreting reality, right? And that's exactly what they did do. They were pushed to think about things in a much deeper way. And Starry Night is the absolute epitome of that. Starry Night is the epitome of, you look up at the light, at the night sky, and do you see little pinpricks of light, or do you see a world whirring with possibility? Do you see a universe expanding outside your window? Right? And that's something that a photo can't capture. That's a spirit and an attitude and an interpretation that a photo simply can't capture, unless you're talking about long exposure where you get those what they called star trails. I've actually photographed star trails when I was still a photojournalist, when I went out to, but I mean, it's still very different. It's still very different. I mean, that's a star trail. It's quite amazing, but it's definitely not the creative thing you're seeing in Van Gogh's painting. I mean, look at that. That's quite an amazing picture, but it's creatively dead in a sense. Okay. It does bring in a new dimension. Yeah, so it challenges it challenges our human perception. It challenges us to think in an authentic way, in a creative way, in an intuitive way about the world. You're still seeing the world, but you're seeing something in the world. You're seeing energy, almost like Neo in the Matrix, where he sees everything through computer code in ones and zeros. That's one way of seeing the world. Another way is the way Van Gogh saw the world, as bristling with energy, like electrical energy, with life, right? And one of the ways that he did that was through the color, the vibrant color that he introduced to his canvases. But the other way was through those energy lines, and also the speed at which he painted as well. It's good to hear, Yvonne. Okay, so let's continue. So it's interesting. He talks about, was Theo's Dutch friend, or were Theo's Dutch friends affected by professional jealousy? Then he says, now what shall I say about your little piece on the plants and the rain? You can see yourself that in nature many flowers are trampled underfoot, frozen or scorched, and for that matter, not every grain of corn returns to the soil after ripening to germinate and grow into a blade of corn. I don't know, I find this really incredible. Is you must imagine Van Gogh sitting at a table. Maybe he's all alone. Maybe his brother's at work, and is using possibly a quill. You know those ink pens that you dip into ink. But basically, what he's writing is scratching on the paper, and in the midst of being in Paris, and in the midst of this tower starting to rise, this metal tower, He's writing about blades of corn and grains of corn returning to the soil. He's writing about flowers trampled underfoot, frozen and scorched. He's talking about all of that um, kind of agrarian subject matter. And you sort of feel like that never really left him. The love of the land, the love of the soil, the love of nature, that embrace never really left him, even though he went to Paris. That he was always a son of kind of the sun and the field, right? Even though he tried to move away from it, he ended up embracing it. He says, to compare human beings with grains of corn now, in every human being who is healthy and natural, there's a germinating force, just as there's in a grain of corn. And so natural life is germination. What the germinating force is to the grain, love is to us. What an extraordinary statement, right? But simply this idea of germinating, he's very caught up with it. He's caught up with this idea of something that is not just expanding, increasing, or growing, but something that is coming to life, right? It's not just um, um, something that is going viral, something that is repeating itself. There's something almost magical in something that is coming alive, right? Um, I've got a friend who's got three boys, or I suppose you could say they're men now, and I've kind of watched them grow up from a distance, and I've watched them um have certain struggles, and I've watched them have girlfriends, and some break up, and others. The eldest son is now engaged. I think he's about 23, 24 years old. He's engaged. For the first time that I can remember, all three boys have got girlfriends at the same time. And I was actually lucky enough to go to a barbecue. And although I was a little bit intimidated because all the guys are there and their girlfriends are there, and his mother was David's mother was there, and brother was there and his wife, and I was like the only like hi. I actually thought another friend of mine would be there as well, but didn't happen. But um, it's especially when you see, for me, when you see a young girl. I suppose you could say the same with a young guy as well, but you see so much change in when a girl becomes a woman. They seem to get this incredible strength and this incredible, I don't know what it is, power, and that is something that is germinating, right? And we've all gone through that. We've all gone through going through adolescence, where you felt these explosions taking place inside of you. And what is actually happening is we are germinating as people. Our emotions are finding, that's almost like this volcano that's finding a new natural level. Um, and there's something that feels magical about that process. And Van Gogh is recognizing that. And it's at a time that the world have recognized that germs exist, that there's life in a drop of water, right? The microscopic life in a drop of water, that there's germs in blood. I mean, they're not quite there yet, but they're starting to figure out that there's such a thing as rabies, and that you need something to combat that thing, right? And when you're going to engineer a structure, you need to understand the laws that govern um, small things and big things, right? The same laws that govern a small thing, and how much weight a wheel can carry in an axle on a small thing, you need to know it on a bigger thing, right? And on and on and on. And so, in the same way that germinating is happening in the change of seasons, and in the art world, and in the engineering world, and in the medical world, and electricity is coming online, he is comparing it to love, to this feeling of love, and he's almost comparing love to whatever force a individual grain seed is imbued with, that it leads to everything else, the field that arises, that ripples in the wind, and the grain that is then harvested, and all the things that come out of that, breads and cereals and whatnot, right? And so he's seeing even though he's this poor stinky fellow, and he is drinking and is fighting with his girlfriend, his mind is actually on incredible subject matter, a transcendental subject matter, and that is exactly why it still reaches us 130 years later, because it doesn't really matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a housewife or a president or a street sweeper or a whatever celebrity. When you're thinking about this idea of germinating, of something that arises with a force that is almost beyond itself, there's something incredible about that spirit that you have regarding the world and yourself in the world, because when you see the world as germinating, as becoming something, it's not just 1+1=2, but there's something extraordinary taking place that's a little bit beyond our understanding. You can kind of predict it, but it also goes into areas that you can't predict. Then you are also acknowledging your own potential. You're also acknowledging that, as well as I know myself, I can perhaps do things, I'm perhaps capable of doing things that I have no idea about. And to give a stupid example, if you think about Superman comes to Earth, and although he is who he is, and although he knows that he is special, he hasn't even started to tap the power that he has, that he can shoot laser beams out of his eyes, that he can fly around the world in whatever time it is, that he can withstand all of, and in a way we are the same. The old Superman comic character imbues the sense of, I know I've got potential, but I just don't quite know what it is exactly. And there's something extraordinary in that idea, especially if you're an artist, to say there's something going on in the world. There's some electricity beneath the surface of things that I can't quite put my hand on. I can't quite get a handle on it, but it is there. There's something really incredible about that. If you think about some of the world's greatest geniuses, Einstein, I don't know, you might say Elon Musk isn't a genius, but they see the world in a sort of a global way, and the universe in a sort of a global way, where that you almost associate with gods, where gods play dice with the universe, they play dice with the speed of light, and well, maybe we can go from this planet to that planet, and they think in ways and with levels of agency that we're not used to thinking about. We're used to thinking about making a cup of coffee. They are used to thinking about creating highways to other planets, and in a practical sense. And all of that is germinating ideas, and this idea of things aren't static, things aren't on this singular plane, things are going on in a multitude of dimensions, right? And just the subject matter that I'm taking you into has got to be triggering you to think about things that, and possibilities and potentialities that you've abandoned or forgotten about or haven't thought about in a while, right? And it's that thing that is so exciting to the artist. So anyway, there he says, what the germinating force is to the grain, love is to us. Now we tend to stand out, putting a long face and at a loss for words. I think when thwarted in our natural development, we find that germination has been foiled, and we ourselves placed in circumstances as hopeless as they must be for a grain between the millstones. What a incredible analogy, is saying sometimes we feel ourselves in terms of our circumstances, like a seed grain almost caught in between the millstones that are meant to crush that. And he's talking about the crushing of the human spirit, by circumstances. When there's so much locked into that grain, but it can be crushed, but maybe it'll be crushed and maybe it won't be. But what if it isn't? Then he says, when that happens to us and we are utterly bewildered by the loss of our natural life, there are some amongst us who, though ready to submit to the inevitable, are yet unwilling to relinquish their self-confidence and determined to discover what is the matter with them and what is really happening. And if, full of good intentions, we search in the books of which it is said that they illuminate the darkness, with the best will in the world, we find precious little that is certain, and not always the satisfaction of personal satisfaction. It's incredible how this downtrodden loser writes with the sparkling intelligence and self-possession of a great intellectual. You can hardly imagine this stinky, drinking loser who can't sell a painting has this, as Theo puts it, enviable intelligence, right? But he does. And he says, and the diseases from which we civilized people suffer most are melancholy and pessimism. So I, for instance, who can count so many years of my life during which I lost any inclination to laugh, leaving aside whether or not this is my own fault, I, for one, feel the need for a really good laugh above all else, right? This again just confirms that he's gotten over his struggles in the past. He's not someone who, when faced with a difficulty, when faced with despair, when faced with a trial, just gives in, throws in the towel, and life's too hard. His whole life has been hard, and he's dealt with it, and he's happy with it. He's happy to live that kind of life. He's signed up for it. And that is in a way what makes it quite hard to live with him, because most people want to avoid struggle. Most people want recognition in a certain way. Most people want money or reward or credit, whereas he seems to see things in a totally different way. He says, I found it in Guy de Maupassant, I think that's that author, and others, Rabelais among the older writers, Henry Rochefort among the present-day ones, who provided as well, and Voltaire in Candide. If, on the other hand, one wants the truth, life as it is, then there are, for instance, de Goncourt in Germany, and he's just talking about books, La Fille Elisa, Zola in Joie de Vivre, and Le Sommoir, and so many other masterpieces, all portraying life as if we feel it themselves. And can you see what has actually been taking place here is, in all of these areas where there's been this germination, this electrifying of human potential in a way, you've also had it in writing. You've also had writers seeing reality in a different way, and also with this idea of photography, where you say, here's a machine, and if I click this button, this machine can actually store perfectly a person's face, a mountainscape, a train rolling by. It can actually capture time perfectly, better than any artist. And how does that then affect the writer's way that he visualizes things? When you've got a thing like photography, the writer's also got to compete with photography. When I wrote books like this book, right, I was going to narrate it earlier tonight, I was thinking, how can my writing compete with Marvel movies and with television and with YouTube and with the internet, right? How can I come up with something that is better and more powerful than all these other things that are already pretty powerful, right? And that's where you really have to challenge yourself, right? And so that is exactly what happens is Vincent van Gogh starts reading writing that is about reality, is about seeing reality. And you see those words. He says, all these masterpieces portraying life as we feel it themselves, thus satisfying our need for being told the truth. Can you see why Van Gogh really resonates with us, with me, with you? Because he values the truth, and he wants to tell the truth, and he wants to, share the truth. And so part of what he's feeling is feeling through narratives, through books that are filled with life, filled with germinating, filled with passion, filled with electricity. But also, when you read it, your imagination fires up and it feels like you're right there. And he wants to do the same with his pictures. And unlike a black and white photo of a steam train that perfectly captures the swirls of smoke and the gleam, the polished gleam of the wheel on the track, the good artist can capture some of the motion and power beyond that portrait. And that's what he's trying to do. The symbolism. If there's one thing that a photo is not so good at capturing, it's symbolism. And an artist can imbue his art with extra color, an extra texture, an extra epicness in terms of scale and proportion to bring that about. He talks about the work of French naturalists, Zola, Flaubert. Again, he mentions Guy de Maupassant, de Goncourt, all of these authors. He says one can scarcely be said to belong to one's time if one is not acquainted with them. So he is a very well-read tramp. I mean, he's a very well-educated modern thinker trapped in the body of a dude with dirty clothes that nobody really pays much attention to. Is the Bible enough for us? That's quite an interesting rhetorical question for someone who's a preacher's son and someone who studied it himself. What does he say? These days, I think Jesus himself would say again to those who sit down in melancholy, it is not here, it is risen. Why are you seeking the living among the dead? If the spoken or written word is to remain the light of the world, then we have the right and duty to acknowledge that we live in an age when it should be spoken and written in such a way that if it is to be just as great and just as good and just as original and just as potent as ever to transform the whole of society, then its effect must be comparable to that of the revolution wrought by the old Christians. Can you see, he's not only wanting to paint a picture, like his thought process isn't just, hi, I'm Vincent, please buy my artwork so that I can buy a hamburger. That's not his thought process. He doesn't really care about money. He's thinking, how can I, and I mean, that is incredibly hard to do. How can I paint this flower or this woman sitting on a chair or that field in a way that communicates something that says to society, think about the world this way. And when you do, society will be transformed. You know, when you are all alone, I mean, what's so incredible about this painting was when Van Gogh was in the asylum. He didn't paint this when he was in Paris. He didn't paint it when things were going well and he had crystal clarity, peace of mind. He painted this when he was in very deep despair. And what do you think Starry Night's communicating? It's communicating something that is soothing yet epic, peaceful and edifying yet magical and magnificent. That's what he's trying to communicate. But he's also not just trying to paint a star in a village and then someone comes along and buys it so that he can buy himself another pair of shoes. He's trying to do far more than that, and he doesn't care about his own struggle and his own suffering. He cares about, can I change society? Can I talk to society? And that is what is so incredible about the Van Gogh story, is that he manages to do that. He succeeds, not in his time, but in a time beyond his time. He's still succeeding today. because he really thought deeply about what he was trying to do. He was really trying to say more than just capture, like, in a way, I make a bit of fun of my brother. I will say, because he's a painter, I'm a photographer, and I like painting and drawing, but I feel limited by what I can say. And so I will make a little bit of fun of his art and my great grandfather's art. And I call it Boompie Bergie Huisie, which means little house, little mountain, um, little tree. In other words, all you're painting is something that's there, something that's there, something that's there. Isn't there more to say than that? And his skies do say more than that, right? But even so, I'm still making a bit of fun saying, can you not try and say a bit more than that? And so if I had the technique, if I had, and I would love to get to that point, I took a photo a long time ago of a little Cape robin sitting on the top of a the side of a roof. I'm not sure what they call it, the gable. So the gable kind of goes like this, and then the bird is just happened to be sitting on the top. And I think I was covering Van Gogh at the time, or was anyway, I had Van Gogh on the brain, and I just looked at that little picture and I thought of how you could make just that little bird sitting on a wall totally awesome. You could turn the sky behind it into this almost atomic explosion and this radiance coming out of the bird and give this bird like almost a godlike um, preeminence over its own little world, that out of this little bird's breast and its body was flowing this incredible, song and whatever that was flooding out into the world. And that's how I see the art that I want to do, compared to there's a little tree, let's draw it and let's make a rainbow over it. You know what I mean? Say something that's incredibly um, transformative with the most basic thing, a little bird that you see in the morning, you know. And that's a picture I've had in my head for a long time, and I've sketched what I want to do with it, and I've just never done anything with it. But that's also the way Van Gogh is seeing things as well. He's seeing the sun as this throbbing nuclear furnace, not just something that you wear a cap so that it doesn't blind you, or the sun's there, put on dark glasses. He actually acknowledges the sun, which very few, if you think about artists, they always hint at the sun, that they show where the sun is coming from. They show shadows, but they never show the sun itself. They very seldom do. In that sense, Van Gogh is actually quite special. How many artists do you know that draw scenes at night, like a landscape at night? It's also something you virtually never see. Anyway, it goes on to say, sorry for going off the. Glad to hear that, Stephanie. So he goes on to say, I, for my part, am always glad that I've read the Bible more carefully than many other people do nowadays, just because it gives me some peace of mind to know that there used to be such lofty ideals. But precisely because I find the old beautiful, I find I'm not sure if he means news beautiful or new beautiful. I don't know if that's a typo. Because we are able to take action in our own time while the past and future concern us only indirectly. So he's saying what's so amazing about living at that time in the 1880s. He's saying we've got so much agency. There's so much we can do. It's quite an incredible thing for this guy with no money to be saying. He says, my own adventures are confined chiefly to making swift progress towards growing into a little old man, with wrinkles, a tough beard, and a number of false teeth, and so on. But what does all that matter? I have a dirty and difficult trade, painting, and if I were not as I am, I should not paint, being as I am. But being as I am, I often work with pleasure, and I can visualize the vague possibility of one day doing paintings with some youth and freshness in them. So that's kind of what he wants to do. Is he wants to put youth and freshness into his art. Do you think, would you say that there's youth and freshness in this? Would you say that there's a youthful spirit, an energetic freshness in this interpretation? That's really transcendental. It's, I mean, Starry Night doesn't feel like an old painting. It feels like it was painted a few minutes ago. Gian, thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's continue. If I didn't have Theo, I should not be able to do justice to my work, but having him for a friend, I'm sure I shall make progress and things will fall into place. As soon as possible, I plan to spend some time in the south where there's even more color and even more sun. But what I really hope to do is to paint a good portrait. So there, to get back to your little piece of literature, I have qualms about adopting for my own use or about advising others to do so for theirs. The belief that there are powers above us that interfere personally in order to help or console us. Providence is such a strange thing, and I must confess that I haven't the slightest idea what to make of it. And while there's still a degree of sentimentality in your little piece, and its form is reminiscent above all of tales about the above mentioned providence, or let's say the providence in question, tales that so often don't tales that so often don't hold water, and to which a great many objections might be made. And above all, I find it alarming that you believe you must study in order to write. No, my dear little sister, learn how to dance or fall in love with or more of the notaries, clerks, officers, in short, any who are within your reach. Much rather commit any number of follies than study in Holland. It serves absolutely no purpose than to make people slow-witted, and I won't hear of it. For my part, I still continue to have the most impossible and highly unsuitable love affairs. Well, at least he knows that. From which, as a rule, I come away with little more than shame and disgrace. That's why I want to write a book, The Mistresses of Vincent van Gogh, because each one is a tragedy and a disgrace, and it's kind of amusing at his expense. And in my own opinion, I'm absolutely right to do this since I keep telling myself in years gone by when I ought to have been in love. Yeah, so yeah, you have it. When I ought to have been in love, I gave myself up to religious and socialist affairs and considered art holier than I do now. So he, and I don't know if you remember in the early Van Gogh letters, I kind of made the point that on a Sunday, he's studying the history of the Bible, he's studying Greek myths or something. He should be out there meeting girls, and you would sometimes talk about in a letter to Theo, you talk about seeing someone out, seeing people walking out the window, or seeing people going out dancing, and he talks about that I've given up so much of my youth. I've given up having these relationships because I was trying to be like dad, or I was trying to um, be one of Zola's pilgrims, right? Religious and socialist affairs. And now he's realized, you know what? It's like if music be the food of love, play on. I need the food of love. I need to also, I'm not just a painter, I'm also a lover. And he's saying, I'm doing that now. I absolutely have the right to do this. And Theo is probably feeling like he's living with a teenager. Like, can you stop going on with women the way you are? Can you try and just, And he's saying, you know what, I need to have these experiences. I didn't have them when I was younger. And that is quite a hard person to be with if you are at a different point. Then he says, why are religion or justice or art so sacred? People who do nothing but fall in love are perhaps more serious and saintly than those who sacrifice their love and their arts to an idea. Be that as it may, in order to write a book, do a deed, paint a picture with some life in it, one has to be alive oneself. How's that? So he's saying to his sister, it sounds like she wants to become a writer. He's saying, don't go and study writing, just live a little, um, have experiences, and then write about that. Yeah, he is a late bloomer. And unless you never want to progress, study is a matter of very secondary importance for you. Enjoy yourself as much as you can. Have as many diversions as you can. And remember that what people demand in art nowadays is something very much alive. So here you have him telling us what he thinks people want. What people demand in art is something very much alive. Isn't that in a nutshell what his art eventually communicates? Germination, life, movement, energy. Good night, Mel. Is Mel leaving us? Thanks for being with us, Mel. Um, he also talks about strong color and great intensity. So he's also not just trying to paint a painting. He wants the intensity he feels, the intensity he sees, to be in that as well. Now think about Starry Night. Is the intensity in Starry Night? There you go. I should be most obliged if you could let me know how Margot Becherman is and how things are with the De Groot's. How did that business turn out? Did Sien De Groot marry her cousin, and did her child live? Of my own work, I think that the picture of peasants eating potatoes I did in Newnan is the best I've done. I must say that is actually quite shocking to read. That, I mean, he's writing this in 1887, and he still seems to think the peasants eating potatoes is his best work. And why is that? Like I don't really like that painting, but because I don't like the color and I find the whole tone kind of insipid. But why does he like it? And the reason is because he's not drawing peasants eating potatoes. He's drawing the human condition. He's drawing um, he's drawing on his opinion of the human spirit, that there's something beautiful in the struggle of the simple struggles of simple people. That's what he sees, and he sees something pure um, and warm in that, and edifying. Whereas we see green slime, right? And anyway, that is where he still is, and he's trying to move away from that, but he's not quite sure how to or where to from there. And yeah, that is it. He can relate to that. How does he relate to Starry Night? Well, he does find a way. Anyway, he says, since then I've had no chance of getting models, though on the other hand, I did have a chance to study the color question. And if I should find models again for my figures later, then I would hope to be able to show that I'm after something other than little green landscapes or flowers. Stephanie, you're right. This is a super long letter. Last year, meaning 1886, I painted almost nothing but flowers so as to get used to colors other than gray versus pink, softer bright green, light blue, violet, yellow, orange, glorious red. So, you know, if you stuck in grays and excrement browns and slime greens, if you like stuck in that, like I just can't, there's a red, I just can't put that on my painting. What's going to force you to do that? Well, painting flowers, right? And something that I've always wanted to do, and I've told someone about it, and I was told that is like heresy in terms of art. But something I've always wanted to do is photograph flowers, print them onto canvas, and then paint over the photo with a genuine color of that flower, and you like have the petal with you with the paint, where you get the exact color, because photographs can't capture that. So if whatever, 150 years after the advent of photography, cameras still can't realize that's the color of the flower. It's like it's just too pink or red or whatever. I can't believe it. There's still an area for artists to tell the story of color, right? And that's always been something I've been wanting to do. But yeah, I haven't really gotten around to it. Yeah. And someone said, yeah, but that's cheating. But the story I want to tell is a story of color, not, I don't want to waste time on did I get the shape of the petal right, But anyway, that's something I wanted to do. Oh, Yvonne says I've done that very thing. Yvonne, I think I must maybe come and visit you when I eventually get round to going to America and see you do that and maybe I can do it with you. I wouldn't mind um, something like that. We must maybe make a plan. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that's interesting about the Aborigines. Yeah, it is. Well, it is excrement brown. It definitely is. Okay, so he goes on to say, when I was painting landscapes at Asnieres this summer, I saw more color in them than I did before. See, so he is starting to slowly deviate. He's starting to find color. He's starting to see color. He's starting to use color. Now I'm going to try it with a portrait. And I must say, I'm not painting any the worse for it. Perhaps because I could tell you of a very great deal that's wrong with both painters and paintings if I wanted to, quite as easily as I could tell you something that's good about them. I don't want to be included among the melancholy or those who turn sour and bitter or ill-tempered. Now, this is something I want to be quite strident about, quite emotional about, I feel quite strongly about this. I think it's an injustice to Vincent van Gogh that he's remembered as this troubled, depressed, mad, suicidal artist. I think it's wrong. And in a way, that's why I've written The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, why I went to the trouble to go to Arles and Orvez and the Netherlands and the Van Gogh Museum, and why I'm doing this series. Because he doesn't want to be remembered as some depressed dude who gave up on life when we know he was a much stronger person than that. He was a much more extraordinary person than that. Yeah, it's the last thing he wanted his legacy to be. So I don't know what my legacy is going to be. I shudder to think, but I would hope at some point my work on Vincent van Gogh is going to start ringing bells. Who knows? Maybe some other writer comes up and they win the Pulitzer, and Vincent van Gogh was murdered, and it's all their idea. Whether that happens, the important thing is that he's remembered for who he was. One of the most important artists in the human story is also a fake freaking news story. It really pisses me off. Okay. And you get who he is through his letters. You don't need to go to an art expert. Read his fucking letters. Get the sense of who he is through his letters. Anyway, it says, to understand everything is to forgive everything. And I believe that if we knew everything, we should attain some serenity. Now, having as much of that serenity as possible, even when one knows little or nothing for certain, it is perhaps a better remedy for all ills than what is sold in the pharmacy. Much of it comes by itself. One grows and develops of one's own accord. So don't study and grind away too much, for that makes one sterile. Enjoy yourself too much rather than too little. And don't take art and love too seriously. There's very little one can do about it. It is mainly a question of temperament. Isn't that a quote for the ages? Isn't that a quote you can write on your teenager's birthday card, or on your husband's Christmas card, or wife's Christmas card, or whatever, right? Enjoy yourself too much rather than too little. Should you rather enjoy yourself too little? Maybe you shouldn't enjoy yourself the way Van Gogh did, but rather too much than too little. Don't take art and love too seriously. Don't maybe take true crime too seriously, although I think it does need to be taken seriously. There's very little one can do about it. It's about temperament. He says, if I were living near you, I should try to make you understand that it might perhaps be more practical for you to paint with me than to write, and that you might be able to express your feelings more easily that way. In any case, I can do something personally about your painting, but I'm not in the writing profession. I don't know. I think he is. I think these letters are a big part of why Vincent van Gogh became Vincent van Gogh in the public imagination. Anyway, and I mean, isn't he a great writer? He's eloquent, he's intelligent, he's sensible, he's authentic, he's interesting, he is observant. You know. Anyway, it's not a bad idea for you to become an artist, for when one has fire within oneself and a soul, one cannot keep bottling them up. Better to burn than to burst. What is in will out. Right? Quite a powerful letter, this. Yvonne says, I think you should write a book about his loves and expose the truth about Vincent. Okay. For me, for instance, it is a relief to do a painting, and without that, I should be more miserable than I am. Again, what he's telling you is when he's painting, he's happy. When he's painting, it satiates the grief. It pushes aside the despair. And so what was he doing in the last 2 months of his life? He was painting more than ever. In other words, he was less miserable than fucking ever. Right? He was on fire. Not the fire was dying, he was on fire. Something tells me that people who believe that he killed himself believe that because they don't understand the fire of the human spirit. They don't understand the artistic fire. They are not artists themselves. Then he says, give mother much love from me. That's not a sentiment he's been communicating very much because he's kind of been estranged. He says, I was deeply moved by something, à la recherche du bonheur. I've just finished Mont Oriole, so that's another book by Guy de Maupassant. Art often seems very exalted and, as you say, sacred, but the same can be said of love. And the only problem is that not everybody thinks about it in this way, and that those who do feel something of it and let themselves be carried away by it have to suffer so much. Firstly, because they are misunderstood. Ain't that the truth? But quite as often because their inspiration is so often inadequate, or their work is frustrated by circumstances. One ought to be able to do two or even more things at once. There are certainly times when it is far from clear to us that art should be something sacred or good. This is such a long letter. Anyway, and this is the last paragraph, do weigh up carefully if those with a feeling for art and trying to work at it wouldn't do better to declare that they are doing it because they were born with that feeling, cannot help themselves now following their nature, than make out they are doing it for some noble purpose. Doesn't it say in à la recherche du bonheur that evil lies in our own nature, which we have not created ourselves? I think it is so admirable of the moderns that they do not moralize like the old ones. Thus, many people are appalled and scandalized by vice and virtue of chemical products like sugar and vitriol. I think it's just saying that evil is innate. It's not that someone else is evil and I'm good. Evil is within all of us. So there's a footnote here, just that Vincent used the old spelling of Christians, and so he's expressing kind of an aversion to religious conventionalism. So even as a Christian, he's quite a modern thinker. Then he says, we see that Vincent used the conventional spelling Christenen. We can only wonder at Johanna's motive for this piece of religious mythical nonsense. Okay. So it seems like Joe did something not entirely honest here by doing something, making a note or something. I'm not quite sure what that's about. Okay, so now we go to the last letter, and then we're in all. Yeah. So we're going to go through two more letters. Are you guys happy with that? We're almost at the 3-hour mark. Yeah, that's a great quote, Gwen. Okay, so let's get going. This is not a long letter. From Vincent to Emile Bernard, and that's another person that would be one of Vincent van Gogh's few friends. So it's a friend that he made in Paris. It was actually a friend of Paul Gauguin's that becomes sort of his friend as well. And what's quite interesting is that Paul Gauguin writes to Bernard, and then Vincent van Gogh does as well. And they seem to be having a contest about what is really going on. Anyway, we'll get to that. So he says, "My dear Bernard, I feel impelled to apologize to you for having left you so abruptly the other day. So I do so herewith without delay. Apologize. I recommend to you to read Tolstoy's Russian Legends, and I shall also let you have the article on Delacroix I spoke of. All the same, I myself went to see Gulami, but in the evening, and I thought that perhaps you did not know his address. I believe that Gulami, as a human being, has sound ideas than the others, and if all were like him, they would produce more good things and would have less time and inclination to fight each other so furiously. I persist in believing, not because I have given you a piece of my mind, but because it will become your own conviction too. I persist in believing that you will discover that in the studios, one does not only does one not learn much about painting, but not even much good about the art of living, and that one finds oneself forced to learn how to live in the same way one must learn how to paint. It's quite extraordinary what he's talking about here, that I don't want to just learn the art of painting. I want to learn the art of living. I want to share the art of living in the art of painting. That's extraordinary, and that's very authentic. And I felt the same way with true crime. Is I don't want to just gratuitously write about true crime or gratuitously talk about true crime. I want to draw the lessons from the story in a genuine way that we actually take something edifying out of it. There must be a point to it beyond just gratuitous interest, right? And I've also felt the same way about writing. I sort of felt, how can I write a book that means anything if I haven't really lived? I first got to live. I first got to have done things, experienced things before I can do that. And it's only an authentic artist that feels that crushing burden of, I can't say anything unless I've lived it, for it to have any meaning, right? Then he says, talks about without having recourse to the old tricks and eye-deceiving devices of intriguers. he's almost talking about fake news. He says, I do not think your self-portrait will be either your last or your best, although on the whole it is terribly you. So Bernard is also a struggling artist to some extent. Listen now, what I tried to explain to you the other day amounts roughly to this. In order to avoid generalizations, allow me to take an example borrowed from reality. If you have quarreled with a painter and consequently say, if how do you pronounce it? Signa. Sing, I really don't know how to pronounce that. I don't want to butcher that. To see if I can get pronunciation. Sorry about this. Let me just make sure. Okay. If Signac exhibits in the place where I exhibit, I shall withdraw my pictures. And if you slander him, then it seems to me that you are not acting as well as you might. So Yuri seems to be bickering a little bit with Bernard, and he says, for it is better to look at things for a long time before judging so categorically, and to think things over. For in case of a quarrel, reflection shows us as many wrongs on our part as on the others, and that the latter is so much raison d'être. Don't quite know how to pronounce that either. Raison d'être. Let me just get that right as well. Raison d'être. Let me try and get that right as well. Okay, there we go. Raison d'être. Okay. That's the reason for being. So if you have already thought that, what was it? Signac. I've forgotten already. Signac. Signac. Okay. Okay. You guys are going to remember it. Um, and others who use pointillism quite often do very fine things for all that. Instead of slandering them, you must respect them and speak sympathetically of them, especially if there has been a quarrel. Can you see that he is arguing with another artist about arguing? And this is the friend of Paul Gogh, right? Otherwise, one becomes a sectarian, narrow minded oneself, and the equal of those who utterly despise all others and believe themselves to be the only just ones. This even extends as far as the academicians, should be academians or acad, what's a better word than that? Academics, right? Academicians, but it should be academics. Take, for example, a picture of Fantine Latour, especially his work as a whole. Well, there's one who never revolted, but does this prevent him from having that something, whatever it may be, of calm and fairness that makes him one of the most independent characters alive? Furthermore, I wanted to say a few words about the military service, which you will have to perform. From now on, you must absolutely attend to that directly in order to find out, in the first place, what steps can be taken in such a case to safeguard your right to work, to be able to choose your garrison, etc., but indirectly in order to take care of your health. You must not go there in too anemic or enervated a condition if you set a value on coming out of it stronger. Now, you guys know that the other name for syphilis is the French disease, and it was associated with troops, with soldiers, French soldiers. anyway, so Bernard is now about to become a French soldier. I do not consider it a great misfortune for you to be obliged to be a soldier, but rather as a very serious trial from which you will emerge, if you emerge at all, a very great artist. Until then, do your utmost to fortify yourself, for you will need plenty of vigor. If you work a lot during that year, I think you might end up by having a certain stock of pictures, some of which we shall try to sell for you, as we know you will need ready money to pay for models. I shall be glad to do all I can do to make a success of what we began in the cafe. So this is one of his pals from the cafe. But I think that the primary condition on which success depends is to set aside all petty jealousies, for only union is strength. Surely the common interest is worth the sacrifice of that selfishness of every man for himself. With a hearty handshake, Vincent. So he's 34 years old at this point. He's barely got 3 years left to live. And at this point, he heads to Arles. And thank goodness it's a short letter. We're going to read this as the last letter in episode 40. You guys happy with that? Dear Theo, during the journey, I thought of you at least as much as I did of the new country that I was seeing. Only I told myself that maybe later on you will often come here yourself. So he's just left and he's already thinking, I hope you're going to come and visit me. It seems to me almost impossible to be able to work in Paris unless one has a refuge where one can recuperate and regain one's tranquility and poise. Without that, one would get hopelessly exhausted. Now I'll begin by telling you that there's at least 60 centimeters of fallen snow everywhere, and it is still falling. Arles doesn't seem any bigger than Bradar or Mons. Now, what's so exciting to me is that I went to Arles and I spent 3 days there, and I loved it. And I was in certain places walking in the footsteps of Vincent van Gogh, and I took some video, and I'd love to share some of that with you guys. Video of sheaves of grass blowing in the wind right by where he painted the bridge. But what's so amazing is we're now going into a phase, period, where so much of his where his work really did start standing out. Where he painted the sunflowers, and he painted the stars over the Rhine. That's almost like the precursor to Starry Night. But also just a lot of beautiful paintings in the Arles period. And it's amazing to have been there and to have taken photos. I've taken photos of the sites where he painted certain paintings. And so we're about to enter a really astonishing period where there are going to be lots of letters and lots of paintings. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys over the next couple of episodes. So let's just finish off with this introduction. He says, before arriving at Tarascon, I noticed a magnificent landscape of immense yellow rocks, strangely intricate with the most imposing shapes. In the tiny valleys between these rocks were rows of small round trees with foliage of olive green or grey green, which could well be lemon trees. So he's barely even arrived, and he's just seen all of these things, and he's got these pictures popping in his mind, right? But I mean, it's still pretty much winter, right? It's still pretty much winter, and so with the spring is going to arise the incredible yellow of Arles and the south of France, which is going to be his yellow period, right? And it was while he was in Arles that he painted the only picture he ever sold, the Red Vineyard, and that was going into autumn. So basically 6 months from this point, he's going to paint a painting that'll be a painting that he sells. And shortly after that, he's going to get good reviews from an art reviewer in Paris. So his life is about to start shooting upwards, right? And he took a risk coming to Arles and actually paid off until Paul Gogh joined him. Anyway, so he says, um, but here in Arles, the country appears flat. I saw some magnificent red terrain planted with grapevines, with a background of mountains of the most delicate lilac, and the landscapes in the snow, with the summits white against the sky, as luminous as the snow, were just like winter landscapes done by the Japanese. What he's describing there is that he's traveled to this fairy tale landscape and he's really happy to be there. He's gone somewhere only to find it is just what he wanted, right? I will say that although the country around all appears flat, it's not very far before you get some pretty significant mountains. I've mountain biked through them, and that was gut busting, I can tell you. Anyway, he says, here is my address, and you can see it's just off the River Rhone. And he says, I've only taken a little trip into town so far since I was more or less dog tired last night. I'll write soon. In an antique shop on the same street that I went into yesterday, the man told me he knew of a Monticelli. With a good handshake to you and our comrades. Ever yours, Vincent. And so that's it. We are now out of Paris. I told you it would be a very quick, sweeping thing, and we are now in all. And we'll deal with the very many letters from this point onwards in the next episode. Just see if I can show you. Can you guys see this? We are now what was that letter? Was that February? So I think we're about somewhere here. Look at all of these letters that are to follow in 1888. It's the most letters he really ever writes in a single year. Can you see that? So I think we've just dealt with this letter here. Yeah. Right? So that's 21 February 1888. And that is the beginning of a shitload of letters. And the next year is in the asylum. So this is really his last good year. And look how many letters he writes. This year is the asylum, and somewhere around here he paints Starry Night. And then this is June, July's All and Alves. And that's where it sort of ends. So I hope you found this worthwhile. I think you'll agree with me. It's kind of like an adventure every time we deal with these letters. Yeah, so join me in a couple of days for episode 41, where we'll be looking at his first days, his first paintings in all. Sorry to hear that, Mel. I hope your friend's going to be okay. Yvonne says leaving Paris wasn't traumatic for Vincent. It wasn't traumatic at this point. You will see that he will start getting lonely, and then he's going to need money. It's the same thing all over again. And there's quite a interesting what's that movie about fortune? Something of fortune. Just can't think. I think I'm a little bit tired. What's that movie with the words of fortune in it? Not Soldiers of Fortune. Just can't think of it. Reversal of Fortune. Yeah. So yeah, he has a bit of a reversal of fortune in all. So things like go like a roller coaster. His painting goes incredibly well, and then he starts to get a bit down on himself. Thanks a lot, Miami Lifestyle. Jody says, I'm lost for words. Great live. Thanks very much. Terry says, is it strange that I would like to be assigned homework? It's not strange. So how about this? I'll put a link to the last, I'll put a link to the next, I'll put a link to the next couple of letters that are from Arles. So what I want you guys to do is select the artwork from the next couple of letters, say February, March, April. Select the artwork that you want me to have as the background, and then we'll see which is the best one. What you can do is you can put a link to the letter in the comments, write the comments under the video, and then you can describe, you can just copy and paste the name of the thing, and I should find it quite easy. So we'll go from February to the end of March. It sounds like it's not a lot, but yeah. How about yeah, let's make it February to the end of March, and then we'll do April, May in the next thing. Okay. That's really funny. Take Vincent's advice. May your homework be not study but live. Well, you can do that as well. Okay, guys. I hope you found this worthwhile. I can hear the birds singing, so it is a new day here. What time is it in Connecticut? I'm pretty sure it's pretty late there. Is it past midnight? Just past midnight. I think I must let you guys go. I'm not going to even do a long end of live salutation. But I hope you enjoyed this live. I did. It was good having you guys with me. I certainly feel better than I did at the beginning of it, where it was like, I don't know. Okay, guys. Stephanie, I hope you have a good sleep. I don't know whether you're going to go to bed anytime soon, Terry, but I hope you get a good night's rest. He is very prolific. He is really prolific. Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks a lot. East Coasters, that's right. Okay, guys, Peaches, can you see the landscape behind me is fairly orange? So we want to try and have a bit of that in our backgrounds. So look out for that. Winnie says hi to Timmy. Let's see if we can call Timmy. Timmy, come. Timmy. Do you want to go for a walk? Let's go for a walk. Come. There you are. Come, boy. Do you want to go for a walk, or do you want to go for a sleep? Go for a walk. Come, let's go. Let's go for a walk. See, none of that means anything to him. But if I put my shoes on and if my keys start jingling, then he knows that's real. So even Timmy, look at that face. Even Timmy knows what fake news is and what's real news. Do you want to go for a walk? You go for a walk. Let's go. Timmy knows what's bullshit. It's an important skill to learn. Do you wanna? He also knows actions speak louder than words. Anyway. Sorry to hear that, Mel. Sorry to hear that. Yeah, he doesn't believe me, but he will believe me when I stand up and when I put my shoes on. So he is a clever dog. But he's also a little bit like maybe we are going for a walk. Go for a walk. Do you want to go? Do you want to go for a walk? Hmm? Do you want to go for a walk? Okay, come. Let's go for a walk. Come. Okay. Okay, guys. Timmy says bye, and me as well. Take care. I enjoyed this with you. I hope you did as well. Hope you guys sleep okay. Mel, your friend is in our thoughts, eh? I hope it's going to be okay. I think it does, right? Okay. Take care, guys. See you guys next time. Ciao. Say bye.